Welcome to everyone, and let's start this afternoon session with a presentation, with my second presentation of this week, which will be dedicated to bibliometrics. And you already heard several times many references to several issues related to bibliometrics this morning. You heard about the impact factor of journals. Also in previous days you heard about citations as a tool to evaluate the quality of research, the quality of researchers, publications in general, the publish or perish issue, that is publications, maybe first of all the number of publications as parameters to test the maturity and the progress of researchers, and as factors which also, first of all, affect the career of researchers, in particular of young researchers. So, at a certain point, also in this course, we thought that we need to deal formally with some basic informations concerning bibliometrics and bibliometric parameters. What is their definition, what they may be useful for, what they are used for, what is their meaning, and how to deal with them. I have a personal disclaimer that I will tell you before starting my presentation. That is, in my personal opinion, I think that basically the bibliometric parameters as they are and as they are used now are more or less the bullshit of science. But on one side, as also bullshit, they are not completely useless. I mean, in the sense, for instance, that if you take, in Italian, bullshit is, of course, it's possible to translate also in letame. That is, if you take it and if you put it in fields, it may be useful also to help plants grow better if it's used in the proper way. But if it is abused or misused, it can also damage very much the scientific environment. But in any case, just to continue with this few scatologic metaphor, I think, need to know also about this bullshit, maybe also just to understand. Maybe when people will come to you and offer some chocolate, if it's true chocolate or if it is something else. Anyway, need always to know clearly what you have in front and also what you are using and what you are going to use. So this is why I think it's necessary for anyone, in particular in these times, to have also some basic but solid background knowledge also in these issues. Basically, this will be my presentation. Please interrupt me if you have any comment or any question about the topics that I will deal with. I have not so much time, so I also fear that I might be too much fast if I will be not clear. Please stop me and ask me, but I will try to give you some basic essential information in regard to the bibliometric in general and to bibliometric parameters which are commonly used in daily activities in the scientific research environment. So first of all, some basic general definition. First of all, what is bibliometric and when it was born, how and for which kind of application. So, historically, bibliometrics is not so old, and it grew up basically as you see here, to trace relationships amongst academic journal citations. So what does it mean? Basically, bibliometrics is founded on citation analysis. That is the analysis of citations that publications receive by subsequent publications. Basically, the analysis of the reference section of publications. And citation analysis grew in some decades ago, basically about 56 years ago, first of all as a tool to trace what it could be called the impact of a publication, but not in the sense that we give now to the term impact. I mean the relevance, the importance, the influence that it had on science. The impact in the sense, for instance, it might be useful to retrieve prospectively the publications that cited a given paper, in the case that maybe you find in some database a paper, a publication that you consider particularly important for your research. Maybe it's a paper which was published some years ago, and you would like if this paper was followed by other publications which deal with the same topic, and maybe it might be useful for your knowledge and for your project. So in this case you need to find papers which prospectively cited that initial publication. And citation analysis, as it was born, provided the tools to identify these papers prospectively and not only retrospectively, for instance, like you can do in a database like PubMed, where you put keywords and usually you retrieve records, but just retrospectively. This guy, Eugene Garfield, is usually generally considered the main founder of modern bibliometrics, citation analysis. He's the founder of the Institute for Scientific Information, which gave rise to the science division of Thomson Reuters, which very recently has been bought by Clarivate Analytics, which is a very big boss of citation analysis, which grew up as a worldwide industry. But at that time, the bibliographic instruments that Eugene Garfield and some other researchers in the same area developed were mainly dedicated to the needs, for instance, of librarians, just as an example. I mean, on which basis a librarian, an academic librarian, might decide how to allocate the budget? I mean, which kind of journals an academic institution should subscribe? Which kind of journals might be more useful for a given faculty? So, I mean, different faculties, even in the same scientific areas, may have different needs depending on their scientific interests, on their knowledge, their experience, the topics which they are developing. And so citation analysis, I mean, for instance, a common tool, these are a couple of papers as an example, but it's possible to find in not so recent literature. I mean, these papers are quite not so recent, but it's possible to find in literature, in particular in bibliometric literature, in literature in the field of librarian science. Some research which by means of citation analysis try, for instance, to identify the journals which are most frequently cited by the faculty, by the professors and researchers working in that academic institution. You understand the methodology, the approach, with the idea that the journals which should be subscribed as a priority by that academic institution should be the ones which are more frequently used for background supporting information for the faculty of that academic institution. This, in my opinion, it's a proper way to use citation analysis. It's absolutely what citation analysis, it's among the main purposes that citation analysis was developed for. So it's a very good and possibly useful application. But meanwhile, I mean, we are speaking about some instruments that were developed, I told you, several decades ago, possibly 50 or 60 years ago. Meanwhile, over the last century and even more faster now, scientific research grew up very quickly also from the quantitative point of view. I usually use this reference as one of the many that could be taken just to show. This is a paper, this is a study by an epidemiologist who has been already cited several times in this course, first of all by Professor Lex Pauter in his opening presentation of this course. The epidemiologist is John Ioannidis, who is maybe one of the smarter and provocative and innovative epidemiologists nowadays living and working very actively in this field. And in this, in particular, in this research, what they did was exactly by using citation analysis techniques and based on the huge databases that now are available and that I will show you briefly a few later, they revised the output of biomedical research over about 1.5 decades, see 1996 to 2011, trying to identify, the main aim of the study was to identify the most influential researchers by using citation analysis. Now, I'm not interested about showing who were these influential researchers and to tell if this citation analysis is good to identify these researchers or not, but just to take some basic raw data coming from their analysis, that is, they were able to identify in that period, I mean in 50 years, more than 25 million scientific papers authored by more than 15 million people. So this means that nowadays the output of scientific research just in the biomedical field has grown impressively, very fast now. There is an amount of output that it's very, very difficult to keep under control, to monitor, just thinking it's very naive to think that it's just possible to read the papers to understand what is going on in scientific research. A few other numbers. This is another table just showing the growth over the last, over one decade from 2002 to 2011, just of the general number of scientific journals, not only in the field of biomedicine, but international journals indexed at the international level. As you can see, for instance, if you take just, for instance, in the third line or the fourth line, now you also know about this term after this morning, journals which are active and with and refereed, I mean with peer review, that grew up from 2002 about 22,000 up to 2011 more than 30,000. It's a lot. And we are speaking about journals, not about papers. I mean just about journals. And of course, each journal grow, also individual papers grow. This is just another analysis concerning the number of records. Each of these graphs indicates the records present in one of many scientific databases which index publications. All these scientific databases involve different areas. In this case, we have not maybe PubMed, but there are related databases. The output also PubMed is more or less the same. If you look on the horizontal axis, you have just years. On the vertical axis, you have the number of records, but please notice that the number of records is on the logarithmic scale. So this means that, for instance, 6 indicates 10 to the sixth, so indicates millions of records per year, and this linear growth that you see in the graph, it's actually an exponential, a logarithmic growth, which do not show any idea to go to any plateau. It's continuously growing. And in the same way, and even faster and even steeper, you can see the growing. This is another analysis of different sets of databases. You can see the growth, in this case, still in a logarithmic scale, but of the total number of references which are included in these publications. And we are speaking, of course, about billions of references every year. So you imagine how citation analysis now is grown. It's, of course, maybe a practical application of the sector of the so-called big data. But, so one of the bad news is that this incredible development of growth of numbers of journals, of publications, of references gave rise also to the change in the way people and organizations and institutions that need to evaluate research and researcher, a change in the methodology that they use. So a clear, in some way also justifiable, need to move from qualitative assessment, that is reading the output of the research, reading publication, understanding the results of research, to at least first of all a quantitative assessment. So, for instance, from a practical point of view, one of the main needs to know about bibliometrics for instance, any of you who are presently planning to have some career in research in Italy, and not only in Italy. I'm showing now what is going on in Italy since a few years ago, but more or less the same is happening throughout Europe and throughout the world. In Italy, for instance, there was a recent reform some years ago. This is an act that was issued in 2011, which introduces very clearly bibliometric parameters as a requirement that anyone who would like to apply for a position in academia must have. And in terms, you can read here in Italian, for the ones who would like to understand Italian, this has basically the 3 parameters which are evaluated, in particular in the biomedical field and in fields which are similar to biomedicine for the kind of outputs in terms of products of research. It is, first of all, the number of papers published on journals which are indexed in some databases. Second, the total number of citations that were received over a given year. And third, a very specific, we will speak exactly among the parameters that we will speak about, it will be also this parameter, a given cutoff for each discipline of what we call the Hirsch index, or also known as briefly as the H index. And this is the Italian law. This is how things go now. If you are thinking about applying for any position in Italian academia, but in different countries you are likely to find similar situations, first of all you need to think about these parameters, this profile, the number of papers that you published in journals that are indexed in specific international databases, so take care about the journal and this indexing position, the number of citations that you received, and your personal H index. And we need to know also about what does this H index is, what it means, and how it is possible to have an H index. So I feel that in some way this is a very practical and concrete reason to consider bibliometrics as something that, at least from a basic point of view, we need to know about. Basically, we will refer to three main possible databases for citation analysis. The first two, that is Web of Knowledge and the Scopus, which is published by Web of Knowledge. It was developed by the Institute for Scientific Information, Thomson Reuters, now Clarivate Analytics. Scopus was lately and was the first one, the initiator of citation analysis as we know it now. Scopus followed some decades after. I think it's about 20 years old or something like this, and was developed by Elsevier, which is another big boss of scientific publishing worldwide. It does basically similar things, but of course autonomously and based on a slightly or maybe also significantly different set of data. One marginal comment, maybe not so marginal, not so marginal. These databases, which are exactly the two international citation databases, which, for instance, the Italian law considers as the reference for this count of papers, this count of citations, are of course a result of private enterprise. I mean, it's anything public, run by any government, it's private, it's for profit. It's good that it's for profit. I mean, anyone needs to earn money just to live. So, I mean, I'm not saying that it's bad. I just say that it's private enterprise. It's private enterprise which works based on specific agreement with publishers, with journals, agreements which are secret as any commercial private agreement. No one knows exactly about the set of data that are used to provide results of any kind of citation analysis. I will be hopefully more clear continuing in my presentation. Neither at the level of journals, for instance, we will learn immediately what does it mean, this impact factor, which was mentioned also this morning as the main way to rank journals, scientific journals in order of importance. Neither at the level of individual researcher, the meaning of the so-called HIndex, which we were speaking about just a few minutes ago. And then we have Google, and in particular the section of Google which is called Google Scholar, which is freely available. It's just based, even in this case, it's actually totally not transparent. I mean, you just put keywords and then you have an output. You don't know which is the algorithm, you don't know which is but you have some raw data, you have the possibility to access the data. It's for free, not bad. The other two are ask a fee, which is very significant. I will give you some information also about this fee. Google Scholar, which is not considered usually officially, just because it's considered to be not reliable, not so much reproducible, more general, not so rigorous in selecting the base of data. But also in this case, I will give you some hint just that you may possibly go in deep through these topics if you will be interested. This is now not so recent. It was published 10 years ago, but a comparison of the characteristics of these three databases together with the first one, which is PubMed. And it's a good analysis of pros and cons of the different databases for the different uses that can for the different services that they can provide. First of all, of course, not only citation analysis, but first of all, retrieval of publications or records of publications that maybe you might be interested in. I mean, not only for bibliometric analysis, but also to retrieve papers that you might be interested in. And Generally speaking, for instance, as you see, for citation analysis, Scopus offers possibly a few more coverage than Web of Science. Google Scholar offers results of inconsistency and accuracy, just because Google Scholar is just based on the search engine of Google and goes throughout the whole web, taking citations which are not properly controlled. I mean, it can be just citations not only in scholarly publications, but also in websites, in social networks, in newspapers, but without a specific classification, systematic classification of the records and of the citations. And Scopus possibly covers a wider journal range, etc., etc., etc. So, but if you use this tool, for instance, to retrieve information, maybe an advantage of the inaccuracy of Google is that with Google you can find also, for instance, gray literature or just references which would be not formally indexed in databases like Web of Knowledge or Scopus. But let's go on. So, the impact factor. Let's start from this bibliometric indicator that is used more or less properly. You will decide how much more and how much less properly to rank journals according to their scientific relevance and merit. And sometimes, and this I can immediately anticipate, it's a very big mistake, is sometimes also completely improperly used to evaluate individual researchers. So what is impact factor? Impact factor is just the result of the ratio in a given year. Just you see the definition in red. In a given year, the impact factor of a journal is the average number of citations received per paper published in that journal during the 2 preceding years. In other terms, if during the 2 preceding years a journal published, let's say, 50 papers, and these 50 papers received as a whole 100 citations, the impact factor of the journal is 100 divided by 50, it's 2. So for a journal having an impact factor of 2 in 2018, it means that the papers that were published in the previous 2 years received on average 2 citations per paper. This is just the meaning of the impact factor. Possibly very simple. Validity and critics, also in this case, very quickly and very briefly. Of course, first, the impact factor is highly discipline dependent. So the number of citations that a paper can receive depends on the habits of the specific disciplines. There are disciplines which usually cite a lot of papers in the reference sections of publications. There are disciplines which cite very few. So typically there are journals in specific fields who just for the kind of discipline have high impact factor, because usually in that area more references, it's the norm, it's the habit for a paper, and others in which the norm, the habit, it's less references, so they will have a lower impact factor. About the reproducibility of the impact factor, you see another issue about reproducibility of experimental data. We will tell a few more thereafter. But another issue very important that need to know, need to take care, need to consider. The impact factor refers to the average numbers of citations per paper. But the distribution of citation per paper is not a normal distribution. So if we spoke about 100 citations for a total of 50 papers, this does not mean that each of these 50 papers received 2 citations. Usually it means, and there are also some research in this regard that show that even for many, let's say, influential, let's say, high impact factor journals, only a small percentage of the papers published in the journals account for the vast majority of the citations received. Please.
I understand that if it's not a normal distribution, then an average will never be the most indicative measure to show that. But wouldn't it be useful to have like a pattern deviation from the mean? If we are using would not the pattern deviation be useful for us to understand more information?
Yeah, it might be. It might be. It might be. It could be. Totally right. I completely agree. It's a quite interesting issue for researchers in the field of bibliometrics. It's exactly, for instance, what people who do citation analysis behind these very large databases that I told you, they do every year just first to provide the updated versions of the impact factor values and also to check for deviations, to identify potentially, unexpected, quick and huge variations of these parameters that might possibly indicate that something is happening, something is going on. I will provide you immediately with some examples. But first, let me tell you about some... the impact factor, sorry, this is what I would like to tell you first. The impact factor, of course, over the years has become, socially possible to say, socially speaking, the main parameter for the evaluation of a journal. For the evaluation of a journal, we can say in this area, in this place, in terms of scientific merit, this is our perception. But from the point of view of the publishers, we are speaking about journals which allow to earn, that have, let's say in this way, that have a very high commercial value. It's not the topic of this presentation, but just let me tell you that economists which try to do research in this field, and it's not so easy because data are not so easily available, consider the scientific publishing industry as possibly the most profitable industry worldwide, even more than any other kind of industry. So, forget about petrol, forget about big pharma, just think about scientific publishing. So the margin of profits is estimated to be in the order between, let's say, from a careful, let's say, estimation like 20-30% to even 40 or even more % of the investment. It's a lot. You can understand what I mean. For a total amount of business which is estimated in between maybe 10, 15, 20 billion euros worldwide each year. And the impact factor of the scientific journals is one of the main determinants of the commercial value of the individual journal, which of course commercial values is indirectly but very clearly determined by the scientific merit that the researchers community attributes to the journal. So it's a kind of circular process, if you can understand what I mean. And of course, exactly for this reason, there are also several techniques which are very well known by the people who run the journal, publishers, but also editors, also scientific editors of journals, that some specific methodology that can affect possibly positively the impact factor. Some examples, usually, for instance, research papers, original papers reporting original experimental data, just for their nature, we can discuss a few why, but maybe you can understand easily that original research papers, usually, at least in beginning, attract less citations, and we are speaking about the citations in the first 2 years. Personally, I have papers that now outweigh hundreds of citations, but over the years, maybe in 10 years. For the journal that published these papers, it's just important what happened in the first 2 years. And usually, the kind of papers that attract more citations in the short term, it's review papers. So this is why for a journal, publishing review papers, possibly by people who are considered as experts, influentials in a given sector, it's a very good policy to increase citations and increase impact factor. I'm presently editing for the journal that I'm associate editor, a special issue, which will be composed of invited reviews. Why? From my point of view, because the scientific topic, it's one of the main topic for my research, and I'm very happy and enthusiastic about this project. But the journal is totally happy about this project because it will be a collection of reviews written by experts in internationally acknowledged experts, and the journal expects a lot of citations in very short term. And this will likely increase the impact factor. And this is a methodology that made it possible to say, okay, this is how things go, this is how the game, it's the rules of the game. Another issue which is not so the rule of the game is that I told you before, the impact factor is calculated by these databases. So it's something that is released by it's more or less like the evaluation of the economic situation of Italy. I mean, it's these private agencies that decide that we are BBB plus minus something. So who decides why, what, which is the interest? Journals do a specific contract to be indexed. I mean, journals pay these societies to be indexed in these databases. And this payment is also based on a contract that journals do. This contract, usually it's not public. And in this contract, it's also defined what will be considered as citable item, and will go, and citations will go on the numerator of the fraction. And what will be considered, as I told you, sorry, as what will be considered citation, numerator of the fraction, and what will be considered as citable item, denominator of the fraction. And this agreement, which is not publicly available, may and sometimes affects significantly which will be the impact factor of the journal. There are also a lot of other details we have no time to go in, but just to say the impact factor can be to some extent manipulated, and actually is manipulated. There is an attempt, of course, to test to check that journals or individual authors are not going to manipulate so much the impact factor and in general the citation of a journal. And there are a lot of anecdotes like these ones. For instance, in 2007, a specific journal which had an impact factor of 0.66 published just one editorial that cited all its articles in the previous 2 years. And this, of course, in the next year resulted in doubling the impact factor. This led the Web of Science to suspend for 1 year the journal from the list of the official impact factors due to this unintended variation, which, however, depended only by one specific specific publication, which was possibly also intended to increase the impact factor. Another well-known trick, let's say, to methodology to attract citation to for individual publications is, for instance, to put in the title, and this has been reported for some papers like this one, which is mentioned here, to put in the make an attractive, a fashionable, an attractive title that will attract the attention. And many times, just think about yourself. How do you choose the references that you will put in your papers? How many of the references you really choose just because you read all the publication and then decided, oh, okay, this is good, this is best, deserves to be in my reference list? And how many times, on the contrary, you just decided, okay, I need a reference for this sentence, this one from the title, it seems to me it's good. I need for instance, in this case, I need a review about this topic just to support this sentence. Is this a review? Yeah, it's a review. It's in the title. Okay, I will select it. There are studies which show experimentally that if you put review in the title of your paper, you have more probability that your paper will be cited as a reference review in that field. It's honest, it's a few manipulation, it's just self-promotion, it's promotion of the journal. It happens, it may happen, it's better to know than not. The impact factor, no doubt that the impact factor is not a correct measure of the contribution to science of individual researchers. Because as I told you in the beginning, the impact factor of a journal derives from usually a very small percentage of the total papers that were published in that journal. So I mean, having a paper for a researcher, having one paper published in a high impact factor journal means nothing for the quality of that paper, and means even less for the quality of that researcher. For instance, there was a study showing that in 2004, about 90% of Nature's impact factor was based on only 25% of its publications. So it means that the other 75% was just responsible of only 10% of the impact factor of Nature. So I don't know what it was the average impact factor of Nature at that time. Let's say that it was 20. It means that there were 25% of the papers published in Nature that possibly received maybe 25, 30, or even more citations in the first 2 years, but the other 75% of papers published that received possibly also no citations at all. Does this mean that papers which received no citations, there are also studies showing that most of the published papers received no citations at all for several years. It means that these papers are no value at all? I think no. Still, it depends, but be careful, because if you base your evaluation just on bibliometric parameters, maybe this might be an unintended conclusion, which is not so much justified. So I mean, there is a lot of criticisms to the impact factor. One basic, very serious criticism, I think it's about the attempt also to reproduce the impact factor. The impact factor is not so much reproducible. I might suggest you to consider to look at this study, at these studies which was published together by 3 different but related journals by the same publisher, and they are all very good, authoritative, and renowned journals in their respective fields. One, for instance, is the Journal of Experimental Medicine. The publisher decided to try, I mean, maybe not the publisher, maybe the editors-in-chief and the editorial okay, I will be very quick. The editorial committee just decided to check their own impact factor and asked about the raw data from, I think, Web of Knowledge. First, Web of Knowledge didn't provide the raw data. Then they provided some raw data, but this raw data could not reproduce exactly the impact factor, so it emerged that actually there were different sets of data, some more clean, some less clean, some corrected, some refined, some with still a few mistakes, etc., etc., etc. The conclusion was that it was hardly reproducible. So the idea is that now possibly things are possibly improved, also thanks to these inquiries, but this is still a point. At this point now, I need to mention also a recent initiative that is the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, which, based on all these criticisms to the impact factor, encouraged not to use impact factor in general as a measure of scientific quality, and in particular to refrain from using impact factor in evaluating individual researchers. Please have a look at this website, which is freely available and where it's also possible to sign this petition. I would like very much that also our university will sign at some point this petition. This still not happened, and it's a lot of interesting things here. But I promised to tell you also about the H-index. So if the impact factor, I think maybe we established that it's absolutely not, it can be criticized to evaluate the scientific quality of a journal, has some limitations, can be manipulated, must not be used for the reasons that we told to evaluate individual researchers. But there is the H-index. This H-index is something maybe possibly a few more sophisticated, which in the first instance has some attractiveness. I mean, it's interesting, the H-index. What is this H-index? H, just because the person who invented this index, his surname is Hirsch, so H-index. This Jorge Hirsch was is still, I think he's still alive, is a physicist who developed this measure just to try to determine the relative quality in a small group of highly renowned physicists, including also some Nobel laureates, and he provided also some graphs here left, the right lower graph, just showing that individual physicists actually had some H-index which more or less correlated with this H-index. So what is the H-index? Its apparent definition, it's apparently at some point a few apparently complicated, but actually it's very simple. As you see in red, a scientist has index H if H of his papers, if this given number, for instance, I have H-index 5, if at least 5 of my papers received a minimum of 5 citations each. I have an H-index 10 if at least 10 of my total publications received each 10 citations. This is just H-index. It seems good. I mean, more or less general evaluation of all the publication records in terms of, it's possible, for instance, that I published one paper receiving 1,000 citations, but next I published just garbage. So of course I will not have 1,000. I will have possibly, maybe if all the other papers that I published receive no citations, my H-index will be 1. So 1 with 1,000 citations, but criticism to the H-index, once more very quick. First, it does not account the number of authors of a paper. And this morning we heard about what happens, for instance, in biomedicine. It's a rule to have a lot of authors, to have multi-author papers. Sometimes, unfortunately, sadly, it's also the rule to gift authorship. It would be good, maybe next time we will have a seminar about authorship criteria and rules and good practice in authorship assignment. It does not account once more for the typical number of citations in different fields. So, of course, in fields in which the rule is to have a high number of references, it's also possible to have people with high H-index, and the same on the other side. It discards information contained in author placement in the authors list. This morning also you heard about some meaning to be first author, to be last author, to be corresponding author, or something like this. It is bounded by the total number of publications. The argument is that many famous top-level scientists, I mean, for instance, someone estimated that Albert Einstein, who died after publishing his main papers, nowadays would have an H-index of about just 4 or 5. It does not consider the context of citations. Citations are not always good. I mean, Oscar Wilde told it's just important that people speak about us. It's not important if good or bad, but this maybe is good. I mean, for the jet set, for the fashion, for the jet set society. I don't know if it's so good for scientists. There are good citations, there are bad citations. Sometimes people are cited just to say, oh, you see, this is an example of people who do wrong. But the context of citation, of course, is not taken into account. Books are counted as papers, but books can take, for instance, at present in the biomedical sciences, in this context that I show you that happens in Italy, books count nearly nothing. So if you need to build up your bibliometric profile to apply for a position in Italy, please not be involved in writing books or book chapters. They will count nothing. Even if books and book chapters, all of us. It takes a lot of time, but usually it takes a lot of time just because books represent some synthesis, taking also a lot of work that will be extremely useful for people who would like to build some good ground in a specific discipline, in a specific area. Again, confounding factors like gifted authorships, honorary authorships, stolen authorships, imposed authorships. Your boss says, you need to put my name. So this is why, for instance, there are research showing that at a certain time point, usually after tenure, usually when people become, PIs, become directors of departments, become deans of faculty, rectors, the H-index skyrockets. And sometimes the authorship is also something that we would like to give to others, just that to these people. It's so-called honorary authorship, and maybe I will put the head of the department in the hope that he will remember at a certain point that, oh, I published this paper in Nature and I put your name, so please remember about me, remember about friends, yeah? And again, it can be manipulated. Self-citation is the more naive way to manipulate the H-index. It's the more naive way because now all these databases are allowed to check for self-citation. You just need to tick one cell and you will delete self-citations from the record of individual researchers. But now there are researchers showing that there are citation networks. Citation networks is just agree among researchers working in the same collaborative networks to cite each other. This is much, much more difficult to identify. But it happens. You can imagine what it may have happened in Italy when a law decided that the number of citations and the H-index were a key parameter for recruitment and career progression in academia. But of course, we do not need the H-index to understand who are prominent scientists. At least I would like to mention one excellent prominent scientist, very good friend of us, with whom we have a very fruitful scientific collaboration. He works in the United States, and it's just possible to see his most representative publications, his career, what he's presently doing. So we do not need to know that he has nearly 100 of H-index by the way, in Google Scholar. You see, on the other side, in Scopus, based on the same profile, the H-index is just 85. In Google Scholar, he has about 400,000 citations. In Scopus, he has just less than 300,000 citations. So actually, we do not need to know about this number to know that he's an excellent, prominent, internationally acknowledged and authoritative scientist. But unfortunately, there are also people who build websites like this one. This is a very popular website in Italy where everyone would like to be indexed. And by the way, you will find also my name. Why? Because this is how the world goes. So, I mean, if you would like to criticize the world, first of all, you need to live in this world. You need to be alive, and not only alive, but also to be able to say, okay, this is bullshit. It's so much bullshit that I don't care. I'm also a few above your bullshit. And so I can say that it's garbage. Otherwise, of course, maybe most of you know about Aesopus' tale story, the fox and the grapes. Yeah? And you will say, okay, it's garbage just because you would like to have this H-index. Huh? That's it. But you see, as far as we will just say that top Italian scientists, and of course, you can open this website, you can find excellent names, people who don't need to be in this list to say that they are excellent scientists. But please, not top. Not top. It means nothing. I mean, we have no time also to discuss about these topics, but I think it would be very useful and very important. Science is something about collaboration, it's something about networking, it's something about sharing knowledge, confronting ideas, developing together, discussing. So if we speak about top, bottom, it's very good in a soccer league. Sì, ma tanto Francesco non arriva, quindi. Questo stavo andando tranquillo. No, punto. No problem. As I told before, I can continue. Yeah. So just to say, it's very good, of course, to have a ranking if we have a championship, like in the football league, and it's excellent if in this ranking, for instance, Juventus is first. But it's a little bit different from what's going on in science. Science is about collaboration. Speaking about rankings will hamper collaboration. Yeah. So finally, just a few hints. What's next? Different metrics. For instance, the Altmetrics, the non-traditional metric. Altmetrics stands for article level metrics. It's just something that is possible to do with the World Wide Web, with the novel search engines, with the ability to deal with big data. Altmetrics is just something that puts together all the possible measurement of impact that not only a paper, anything may have on the web. Because it's just some software that will collect all the citations that are given publication, person, television, broadcasting, what you want, has on the web with particular regard on, for instance, social platforms, social media, I mean Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, citation on newspapers, blogs, and something like this, and provides a parameter which indicates this impact. Just an example, this is a paper that we published a couple of years ago on a very good journal, possible to discuss with you. Online attention, this symbol, this donut with different colors indicates the total score obtained on this Altmetrics. Now, many journals provide this service, in particular open access journals provide this service, and you see, we have 11, it's good, it's bad. Additionally, this journal also says, okay, you had 11, you were cited, I think, about 14 or 15 times so far in 2 years, which is good. It's above the average of the journal. This journal has an impact factor of about 5. Means that this paper contributed very much to increase the impact factor of the journal because over 2 years it was cited 15 times. And the statistics also says that this paper is in the 879th, 84th percentile based on the global analysis of the big data related to the papers of similar age on the same journals, etc., etc., etc. It's something good, a lot of gratification. When I look at these kind of numbers, I feel immediately endorphins rising, dopamine rising, serotonin rising. So I'm very proud of. Sometimes I go and look about all these statistics. It means absolutely nothing for the content of the paper. We are speaking about this paper. I also never mentioned the title of the paper. So I mean, this is one of the dangers of dealing too much about bibliometrics. But of course, need to care about bibliometrics. It's undeniable, in particular for young researchers. And this is a critical point also in the relationship between young researchers and their mentors. It's something that needs to be discussed explicitly. In my personal, absolutely personal experience, it's undeniable that when about 15 years ago or even less, we succeeded in finally in publishing a paper on a journal with an impact factor with 2 figures, I mean above 10, I can tell you this was a turn in my personal career and in the activity, in the credibility, in the general positioning of my group. So it's difficult to say, I'm not telling you, please don't care, it's nothing, it's garbage. Unfortunately, it's something, it's important. Like the bullshit that you put in the fields, that it's useful, that grass will grow up. Okay. Great to know. So just a few more hints. This is what a very good friend of us, still now researcher at the University of Turin, was writing in a blog on a popular Italian newspaper. Would you like to be a successful researcher? Please have a lot of friends on Facebook, and not only on Facebook. Twitter is more important. If you would like to increase the Altmetrics of your publications, especially open access, please share on Twitter. It's very important. Find friends who will share on Twitter. It increases a lot the Altmetrics of your, and journals will be happy, and maybe the editor will look at the Altmetric of your previous paper when you will submit another one. You understand how things go. In conclusion, while waiting for the colleague who will give the next presentation, okay, I told you practically all the main things that I would like to tell you. Just a few jokes, but examples of what happens when people just deal about bibliometrics, citation analysis, and do not look at publications. There is a very now famous, I mean, nearly everyone knows about this, researcher who reached excellent bibliometric levels and profile, who actually does not exist at all. He was created just fake researcher, and the name was Ike and Care. I can't care. I can't care. You understand in English? I can't care. And he reached very high bibliometric parameters, an excellent HIndex, a lot of citations before people understood that it was just fake researcher. He just published nothing. It was just some inflated citations over the web. This is a joke that some people did in a group of physics. If you can read the last author of this paper, the name is Stronzo Bestiale. Italian people can smile. Of course, English people, English-speaking people or not Italian-speaking people, and first time say, oh, okay, S. Bestiale, no? Good, very good. It's not clear which is the origin of this joke. Maybe it was also because some conflict between colleagues. Maybe it was just genuine joke, or it was some conflict. So, but just to say that it's possible to include also authors which actually do not exist for completely different regions. Bibliometrics as weapons of mass citation, possible to read. Of course, my HIndex is bigger than yours, and some jokes like this. It's possible to smile in the lab. And the last, I promised to tell you that this movement, of course, has also some costs, because these databases are commercial databases for profit. That you understand that they are needed. It's necessary to have access to these databases for institutions, for individuals, and also for institutions. They cost something. For instance, these are the latest data that I have, because this, my university released no more data about it, but we still have subscription to both Scopus and Web of Knowledge. And this is 2013, so this means 5 years ago. 5 years ago, to this small university, 350 faculty, I mean professors and researchers, about 10,000 students, the annual cost to access Scopus and Web of Knowledge was about 30,000 euros. 30,000 euros, I mean, it's not so much, it's not so few. It's a nice car. It's nearly one PhD position. It's what you want, but it's something, it's money. It's money. So, the basics in practice, what I told you, it's a lot of years that I'm quite convinced on what I told you. What I told you, you can also find a very old paper that was published some years ago. You can still find for free on the website. And I think that, yeah, the final reference was this film. I don't know if any of you heard about this film. It was issued some years ago, Live, Die, Repeat, the story of Tom Cruise, who continued to be. So the point was that there was, at least from my point of view, a funny similarity with a comic that was published in more or less the same time on this phdscomics.com website, which I usually read, and I find it usually very funny, sometimes sadly funny, about the research cycle, which is read, write, rinse, repeat. Possible, you should put read, write, publish, rinse, repeat. Read, write, publish, rinse, repeat. But hopefully, but this in some way the circle of publish or perish, I strongly hope that on one side you will be able to take care about this cycle, just because it's critical for your career in the present system, that you will also find your way to, in some way, at some point, break this cycle, just because, I mean, bibliometrics is not what we do every day. So good. Thank you very much for your attention.